Martin Scorsese once said, "My whole life has been movies and religion. That's it. Nothing else." And when you look at his films, you believe him. Scorsese grew up in Manhattan's Little Italy to Catherine and Charles. They were both second-generation immigrants from Italy. They were also both predominantly Catholic and raised Martin as such. Scorsese has often cited the films of Powell and Pressburger as some of his most influential when growing up. These are films that discuss spirituality, obsession, and sexuality, and more importantly, it presented Scorsese with such vivid, powerful imagery. These are films that are seemingly otherworldly to Scorsese's blood-soaked frames. Films like Black Narcissus, A Matter of Life and Death, and The Red Shoes not only convey their character struggles through unique situations and striking visuals, but they showed Scorsese that filmmaking is an art form. Scorsese lived a duality away from the screen. In the neighbourhood in which he grew up, organised crime had a big presence there, and Martin saw a lot of violence at a young age.
You see, for me, violence here is always the same. I grew up here.
On the other end of this, Scorsese attended the Cardinal Hayes Boys' School, an all-boys Catholic school, and trained to become a priest before eventually choosing to study film and the arts. These three aspects shaped Scorsese into the filmmaker he is. His passion for film and film history drove him to become a director, but his childhood surrounded by violence and religion became the narrative and thematic backbone for so many of his films.
I didn't really see a conflict between the church and the movies, the sacred and the profane. Obviously, there are major differences, but I could also see great similarities between a church and a movie house.
From his earliest works, this is clear to see. Take, for instance, Mean Streets, that follows a group of young gangsters who are trying to navigate their interpersonal relationships and struggles with faith, all the while trying to ascend the ranks of the mob. The film feels truly personal for Scorsese, as the main character Charlie is torn between his violent lifestyle and his Catholic guilt.
It's all bullshit except the pain, right? The pain of hell.
With Charlie, it's tough to tell what's a facade and what's not, as he's desperate to embrace the violent world around him and all the benefits that come with it, but he knows it's morally wrong and tries to justify it.
If I do something wrong, I just want to pay for it my way. So I do my own penance for my own sins. What do you say, huh?
This seems to be commonplace that Scorsese's characters use religion as a justification for their violent actions. Another example is Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull. He cannot control his paranoia and rage, which results in his personal life crumbling. He loses almost everything: his family, his money, his career. The film ends on a passage from John 9:25, which suggests that Jake is aware of his past shortcomings and is trying to move on from them and find his redemption. However, his final monologue reads differently.
It was you, Charlie. You was my brother. You should have looked out for me a little bit. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody.
He's blaming everyone else for his failures and his violent outbursts, and cannot see the pivotal role he played in his downfall. I think the most overt example of religion being used as an excuse for violence in Scorsese's filmography has to be Max Cady in Cape Fear. Cady is recently released from prison and looking for revenge against his defense attorney, Sam Bowden, who intentionally botched his trial. Cady uses his body as a canvas for spiritual influences, as he is covered in Bible passages and religious iconography. He claims to be enacting religious justice, even setting up a mock trial for Sam, and looks upwards, towards God, as though he were the judge.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I agree. That was argumentative.
But it's clear through Max's brutal actions and his tattoos that he has already decided Sam's fate. It's Cady grandstanding over a predetermined trial, just like his 14 years prior. Max thinks himself morally superior due to being wronged, but doesn't take into account the heinous crimes that he has committed. After he was attacked, he screams out,
I am like God, and God like me. I am as large as God. He is as small as I.
Still keeping up his facade of moral righteousness, and further showing that he saw himself as the judge, jury, and executioner in Sam's mock trial. Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver seems to share a similar philosophy. He is surrounded by sin and violence, and feels it is up to him to clean up the streets.
All the animals come out at night. Whores, skunk pussies, buggers, queens, fairies, dopers, junkies.
He sees himself as a saint or a spiritual figure by not only cleansing the world, but cleansing his body and his mind.
There'll be no more pills, there will be no more bad food, no more destroyers of my body. From now on, it'll be total organization. Every muscle must be tight.
Ultimately, these are the delusions of a lonely and isolated man. It's as Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Travis is stuck in a loop and feels the only way he can change it is by cleansing himself and his surroundings. But at the end of the film, where he feels he has redeemed himself and people see him as a hero, he can only see the reflection of the same lonely and isolated man. In all of these examples, religion acts as a dark shadow that is ever present in these characters' lives. Catholic imagery haunts the screen. It's a constant judgment from Scorsese to his characters. Their sins will catch up with them, and they will need to atone for them at some point in their journey. There's examples of Scorsese's work that delves deeper into this and tries to question what it truly means to be spiritual. The Last Temptation of Christ follows Jesus throughout the later years of his life and depicts a more human-centric version of Christ than what audiences were used to. It shows Jesus having doubts, being reluctant to take up his position, and even depicted dream sequences of him sleeping with multiple women. This, along with other aspects of the film, caused controversy amongst Catholic viewers.
Jesus is a person that we can believe in because he's historically valid, not the imagination of some modern-day fanatic.
This film was able to provide audiences with a new interpretation of this story. It showed Jesus as hesitant and doubtful, which ultimately gave more levity to his sacrifice. It would have been easy for him to give in to temptation, but in the end he realises his true purpose. Purpose. That's one word that comes to mind when I think of the Dalai Lama in Kundun.
Kundun! I liked it!
Both his and Jesus' journeys are destined. Although one embodies Christianity and the other embodies Buddhism, they both have a purpose to provide inspiration to their people and their followers, and face struggles when it comes to their own faith. While Jesus' struggle was depicted through his doubt, the Dalai Lama's was through China's annexation of Tibet and the subsequent atrocities that occurred, which resulted in him fleeing Tibet and never returning. Kundun was ultimately a story about pacifism, something that you'd think would stand out against Scorsese's filmography.
You need reform. We are here to liberate you.
No, Buddha is our physician, General Tan. He will heal us. Wisdom and compassion will set us free.
But his visceral, unique presentation of violence made for an impactful dichotomy between the peace of Tibet and the barbarism of Chairman Mao's China. Almost 20 years after this, Scorsese revisited these themes through the film Silence, which follows two Portuguese missionaries who travelled to Japan in search of their former mentor, who is rumoured to have apostatized and denounced the Catholic faith, but also spread the word of the Catholic Church. This film seems to be the most impactful watch when it comes to themes of faith. Silence merges the weaponization of religion seen through many of Scorsese's characters with the evaluation of what faith actually is. Father Rodriguez's faith is routinely tested throughout the film by the Japanese, who need him to denounce, and uses the lives of his Catholic followers as a means to make him suffer, but ultimately apostatize. It constantly asks the characters, and by proxy the audience, what would God want you to do? Would he want you to renounce? Or keep your faith at the expense of so many lives? Scorsese was working on Silence for almost 30 years before its release in 2016, and it depicts a more brutal and harsh representation of faith, but one that feels more steadfast. Throughout all his years of torment, Father Rodriguez died still having faith. He didn't have doubts of faith. He chose to apostatize in that moment to save his followers, but also strengthen his resolve, which feels similar to Scorsese's journey. Through all of the doubt depicted in his prior films, Silence shows that through even the toughest circumstances, you can still have faith, something that Scorsese seemingly feels. Through all of his reservations and doubts about his faith, he's able to recognise the faults of the church and still identify as a Catholic.
There's a difference between religion and spirituality, and religion taken the wrong way could become something that is restricting and becomes intolerable and becomes judgmental.
And that's what these films are. They are raw depictions of faith that challenge the viewer to interpret these films in a number of different ways. He is challenging the viewer to question their interpretations of faith, just like the characters do. There's so much you can discuss about Scorsese's filmography when it comes to religion, and I know I will have missed many nuances throughout this discussion, but I want to leave you with this. His films are his confessional, and that's why there's shades of grey constantly throughout them. Scorsese forces you to see why even the most sadistic of his characters will do what they do. Just like he forces the viewer to see that these films can be both sacred and profane. And these shades of grey change and evolve over time, just like Scorsese's faith.
I think what makes cinema to me, it's something that for some reason stays with you, so that a few years later you could watch it again, or 10 years later you watch it again and it's different.
Before Scorsese understood faith, he understood people. He knew that audiences would evolve over time and reinterpret his films and the characters within them, just like he did with Powell and Pressburger, which is why there's no intrinsically right answer as to how these films and the people within them navigate faith, as to how faith is to be human, and to be human is to think, feel, and evolve. And that's what Scorsese has shown us time and time again. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. See ya!